Hi everyone, it's Caroline or Miss B Overseas. Thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate it and I appreciate you. As always, this is going to be my second in what is an experiment, I guess, I'm doing in the month of April, where instead of doing an end of month wrap up, I'm going to be doing kind of end of week, weekly reading check-ins and just see how it goes. So I posted my first last week, so this will be my second, and just like with the one last week, there's really no plan or rhyme or reason. I'm just going to kind of give you updates from my reading life this week. So let's go ahead and dive right on in. I guess it kind of makes sense to start out with a book that I was in the middle of during last week's weekly reading check-in, which was The Cost of Knowing by Brittney Morris. I did receive this through Libro FM. They have kind of an educator program, so I got this as an advanced listener copy. And I think that I started to describe this in last week's check-in, but for clarity's sake, I don't know how good of a job that I did, so for clarity's sake, I'm going to kind of re-explain the synopsis of this. This is on our main character who, after the kind of untimely and tragic death of both of his parents, realizes that he has developed this supernatural ability where he can see the future of any object that he touches. But as with most supernatural abilities, it comes with consequences, and it's not necessarily like as cool as it seems. I think I talked about in last week's update how just from the initial like first few chapters of listening to it, I was so hooked in. And Brittney Morris starts out with this chapter where she is describing this character working in this ice cream shop, and how every single time that he is forced to touch this ice cream scoop, he is able to see the future of that scoop. But it's just in flashes and in glimpses and in bits and pieces. Brittney Morris does a really excellent job, even just within that first initial chapter, describing how this power is really more of a burden to our main character. Alex, I think is his name. She describes how interruptive it is just to mundane tasks like scooping ice cream and servicing these customers. Alex is constantly having to cancel out these visions in order to proceed with whatever task he was doing before he touched the object. And Brittney Morris definitely speaks on kind of that age-old visions into the future trope or question of like that power to see into the future being really cool until you see things that you don't want to see. And Alex kind of has already been experiencing this, even with the short time that he has had these capabilities. He's harboring a lot of guilt from seeing the death of one of his close friends. And the story's primary conflict is kind of set off by something similar when Alex touches a photograph and he sees the future of the photograph, and what he sees is him placing that photograph on his younger brother's grave. So we as the audience are left with the same questions that Alex is left with. How much time does he have left with his brother? Can he kind of heal the divide that has built up between him and his brother because of his parents' untimely death? And that's kind of what Alex sets out to do in the story. I found this story to be all too important and all too timely, particularly this week, as there's definitely themes of police violence and gun violence, and ultimately how white fear and the misconceptions of white people can systemically cause violence and harm against Black bodies. Brittney Morris really takes great strides to show in this story how white violence is systemic and how it may start with institutions like police. It can trickle down into neighborhoods and just how disastrous and tragic and traumatic that can be. But along with bringing up topics and themes like that, just like she did in her last book, Slay, which I really, really loved, she brings up plenty of moments of Black joy and Black brotherhood and ancestry and how powerful that is. I should have known, having read Slay, how gripping Brittney Morris's writing can be when writing certain scenes. I loved all of the VR sequences in Slay, and Brittney Morris writes a concert sequence at the end of, or more towards the end of, The Cost of Knowing, and I'm not like a concert or festival person. I mean, I'm a human being, so I love and appreciate music, but I just found this concert scene so visceral and real and just made me so hyped and pumped for this concert that was fictional, but I felt like I was there. I could feel like the thrum and pulse of the crowd and the excitement of these two brothers. I think I mentioned last week that I wasn't necessarily in love with the narrator for this audiobook, and that remained true throughout the rest of my reading or listening experience. This is definitely one that I kind of wish that I would have read physically, but the story itself rang so true and clear, even with the narration not being that great in my opinion. And I think that I'm ultimately gonna end up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. And then after finishing the Cost of Knowing audiobook, I ended up picking up Brood by Jackie Polzin. This one was on a whim. I don't even remember where I heard about this in the first place, but I'm really, really glad that I made the choice to pick it up this week. It chronicles a year in the life of this woman as she tries to raise and take care of this group of chickens. And me really enjoying a book that is so heavily about chickens was definitely not on my 2021 bingo card, because this book really is kind of heavy with talk about the anatomy of chickens and a lot of kind of technical ramblings on the care and keeping of chickens. It's not, I mean, it's not only about this woman caring for chickens. As you read, you kind of learn that she is kind of hell-bent on trying to care for these chickens, because you learn that she is dealing with infertility and had a miscarriage. So definitely content warnings for those things. The writing of this one was super, like, it reminded me almost of classics, like kind of Fitzgerald-esque or Austen-esque. I'm gonna be honest, I don't even really know if they have similar writing styles, but I think it was just kind of in these long drawn out examinations of small town and rural life that felt very stream of consciousness, but at the same time also very descriptive. And despite the writing being kind of heavy and spiraling, this book was pretty quick to get through, especially because it's written almost like in vignette form. The chapters are no longer than 3 pages most of the time. I believe that this was Jackie Polzin's debut, and I'm super interested in whatever she comes out with next. I think that I'm ultimately gonna give this a 3.5 stars. Did find the writing a bit tricky to muddle through at times, but like I said, I will follow this author, and I'm very excited to see what she comes out with next, just because I think that what she did in here was really interesting and unique. So those were all of the books that I completed. So let's talk about books. Well, one book in particular that I'm in the middle of, but I'm technically reading multiple books right now. I had that thing happen where I was waiting to obtain or acquire all of the books that were on my April TBR. And in my head, I kind of thought that I would get them in a slow and steady stream, and that would be the order that I would read them in. But I had that thing happen yesterday where I got all of the books at once and was just kind of at a loss of where to go from there. I ended up finding The Love That Split the World by Emily Henry in my school's library, so I was able to check this out. And then I also got delivered, so that was yesterday at school, and then I also got delivered after I came home from school yesterday, Pet and Anxious People, Pet by Akwaeke Emezi, and then Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. And then I also got approved on NetGalley for my arc of The Shape of Thunder by Jasmine Warga, and all 4 of those books are on my April TBR. Nothing that I've read in April so far has been on my April TBR, but now I finally have acquired all of the books on my April TBR, and it just all happened so fast that I really didn't know what direction that I wanted to go from. So I did kind of try a chapter tag on my own, and I read the first chapter of all 4 of them, and honestly that got me super pumped just because of how kind of heavy the writing was in this one. I kind of was feeling a little bit slumpy, but I'm really glad that I chose to read the first chapter of all of these because I loved the first chapter of every single one of them. So now hopefully I can just coast through the rest of my April slump free. After much thought and consideration, because I did love each of the first chapters, I decided that the one that I was the most intrigued by was Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. At this point, I'm about a little over 50 pages into it. I'm actually gonna try to finish it in its entirety after I'm done filming this. This will be my third book that I have read from Akwaeke Emezi, and I have loved all of their books more than the last, and I am always shocked that I have loved each one more than the last one. So I read Freshwater first last year, which is their debut book. And then I read The Death of Vivek Oji, which ended up being one of my favorite books of 2020. And now I am reading this, and even just in the first 50 pages, I had the same thing happen when I read The Death of Vivek Oji too, where I knew that the writing was going to be breathtaking and really, really impactful. But when I started The Death of Vivek Oji, I was so blown away because the writing was so intense, but it was so different from Freshwater. And now I'm kind of getting the same thing with this, where the writing is brilliant, but it's just so different from The Death of Vivek Oji, and then also so different from Freshwater. So I am just amazed, in constant amazement of Akwaeke Emezi and their writing ability. This one is middle grade, and I'll go ahead and just tell you what I've kind of gleaned just from the first 50 or so pages of it. It takes place kind of in a near future US where everything has turned idyllic. What they call in this book monsters have been eradicated from society, and these monsters have been thrown out or driven out by angels who now kind of run this utopian idyllic society. Our main character is a young trans girl named Jam who grew up in this utopian society. She has never experienced any monsters or monstrous things, but she has heard stories passed down from her parents. Jam's mother is a painter who is painting this very ethereal and mysterious painting, and Jam feels kind of a connection to this painting that she can't really understand. And one night she goes to this painting and a monster, or what she believes to be a monster, emerges from this painting. And when Jam questions the monster as to why it is there, it says that it has come back to hunt a monster. So that's all I've really gotten so far. I cannot speak highly enough about Akwaeke Emezi and their writing. I mean, I know that I've already gushed about it, but just this is so ethereal and so, I don't know, alluring. And at the end of each sentence, I'm just tripping my way into the next sentence, just anticipating reading it. I don't know, I just really love it. Don't want to speak too soon, but this feels like a 5-star read. So I guess you're gonna have to wait until my next week's bookish reading update to find out. So I think it's safe to end there. That's everything that I've read and started reading. I'm a little nervous because technically I've only read 3 books in their entirety, and we're halfway through the month of April, and none of those books were on my April TBR, and I still have 5 books on my April TBR. So lots of things are up in the air. But like I said, with having read all the first chapters of all of the books on my April TBR, I am really looking forward to that. I'm excited about all of them, so I think I can do it. Fingers crossed. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are having a fantastic day, and I will see you all again very, very soon. Goodbye.